This is Sang CB Group. This is Census 3. In fact, right now, since China's economic growth rate has dropped a lot, the prevailing assessment is that it won't be able to surpass the United States. 10 years ago, there was much discussion about the Chinese dream and predictions that China would overtake the United States soon. I found a 1990s document where China predicted its future. Back then, Chinese economic experts confidently shared their vision for 2000 to 2050. Let's explore China's ambition to become the world's strongest nation, as described in the 1990s book, What Does China Dream of in the 21st Century, which outlines China's bold future vision. How much has China realized this dream? Let's check it out right now, right? Yes, viewers, you've been watching my videos consistently, but have you subscribed yet? If you could just press the subscribe button now, it would be a great help to me. Please, I'm asking for your support. In 1996, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, under China's State Council, published China's Grand Strategy, outlining Chinese scholars' visions for 21st century China's economy, politics, and society. Let's review its contents. First, the book states that China would surpass France and Germany by the year 2000. China aimed to raise its gross domestic product to $2.3 trillion by 2000, overtaking France. Including Hong Kong and Macau, China was expected to catch up with Germany. In 2000, China's gross domestic product was $1.2863 trillion, France's dollars $1.3705 trillion, and Germany's $1.9437 trillion. The prediction that China would surpass them in 2000 was wrong. In 2000, Hong Kong's gross domestic product was $171.7 billion, and Macau's was $6.7 billion. If you add the gross domestic product of Hong Kong and Macau, China's gross domestic product becomes $1.4647 trillion, which means it did surpass France, right? But China actually started to surpass France in gross domestic product from 2005. In 2005, China's gross domestic product reached $2.48 trillion and France's $2.25 trillion, making China the fifth largest economy for the first time. China overtook Germany in 2007, becoming the world's third largest economy with $4.051 trillion, while Germany dropped to fourth with $3.5693 trillion. China did overtake France and Germany, though the timing was slightly off. That prediction also included that China would surpass Japan by 2010, and it was expected that China would become the world's second largest economy by overtaking Japan in 2010. Amazingly, this prediction turned out to be exactly right. In 2010, China surpassed Japan with a $6.64 trillion economy, becoming the world's second largest. Japan, long ranked second globally, dropped to third with $5.8722 trillion. The timing and details were precise. It was predicted China would average about 9% annual economic growth in the 2010s. This chart displays World Bank economic growth rates from 2010 to 2019. Growth peaked at 10.63% in 2010 and declined to 6% by 2019, averaging 7.599%. They didn't exactly match the average annual economic growth rate, but got a similar result. Recently, as this rate has dropped further, some analysts suggest China's growth engine may have stalled. In 2022, economic growth was 3%, and in 2024, it was 5%. They haven't achieved developed country status. Is the growth rate still declining? China's growth was 10% until 2010, dropping to 5% by 2024. Although they didn't quite reach the 9% average annual economic growth rate of the 2010s, they achieved similar outcomes. I believe this was the boldest and most reckless goal. Were they aiming to overtake the United States as the world's top economy by 2020? I've said this for about a decade now. China can never beat the United States, and even now, after 2020, China still hasn't surpassed the United States. In 2020, United States gross domestic product was $20.94 trillion, and China's was $14.72 trillion, ranking second globally. The gap between China and the United States was smallest in 2021, with China's gross domestic product at $17.82 trillion and the United States at $23.59 trillion. In 2021, China's gross domestic product reached 76.4% of the United States level. But as you can see from the gross domestic product in 2022, it dropped to 70.6%, and in 2023, it fell further to 64%, so the ambition to catch up with the United States is becoming more and more a vain hope. The report projected that by 2050, China's gross domestic product would be 3.6 times the United States'. Citing Chinese data, the Bank of Communications of China estimates United States gross domestic product in 2050 at $49.2 trillion, about double its current level. They're predicting China's gross domestic product will hit $177.12 trillion, 3.6 times the United States, but honestly, that doesn't seem realistic. Even the prediction that China would catch up to the United States in the 2020s is losing ground, so how could it be 3.6 times the United States by 2050? It just doesn't make sense. Until 2010, they included content about unifying Taiwan. In the 1990s, China was optimistic and expected unification before 2010. As you know, Taiwan continues to fulfill its role as an independent country. Instead of unification, the conflict with Taiwan is worsening and now may require war to achieve unification. If they try to take Taiwan by force, they'd have to fight the United States, so they can't act recklessly. Taiwan may be cutting its defense budget, but occupying it would still require a difficult amphibious operation, making it a tough opponent in war. And in 2010, it was predicted that annual automobile production would surpass 10 million units. This prediction actually happened even faster. The first time China surpassed 10 million units in automobile production was in 2009. In 2009, China produced 13.79 million vehicles, exceeding 10 million for the first time. In 2010, production rose to 16 million. China overtook Japan and the United States as the top automobile producer. In 2024, it produced a record 31.282 million vehicles, up 3.7% from the previous year. In 2024, China exceeded 10 million new energy vehicles produced, becoming the world's leading car maker. Since the 1990s, China has aimed to become the world's top nation. This book exemplifies the government's confidence and long-term strategy then. Some details were off, but overall, much was accurate. China didn't surpass the United States, but became the world's second largest economy, closely trailing the United States. Also, China has exerted its own independent influence and even created a new era called the New Cold War. China is definitely not a country that can be ignored. Overall, the book's content turned out to be mostly correct. However, the reason some of the bold predictions missed the mark is because they failed to anticipate the checks and balances from all sides. Historically, whenever a rival emerged, the United States has always used every possible tactic to overpower its opponents. Spain, Britain, Germany, the Soviet Union, and Japan were all defeated by the United States. Now, China faces a similar challenge. As China's stature grew, the United States and other global powers began to check and contain China's expansion. They imposed heavy tariffs and continuously challenged China's policies, putting pressure on China. In fact, the reason China's economic growth rate has dropped significantly today is because the United States has been constantly keeping China in check. There are also considerable internal problems in China. For example, there is a clear and severe wealth gap. Because the government keeps interfering and intervening in businesses, it's impossible to engage in free economic activities. If you look at it closely, everything started to go downhill for China after President Xi Jinping came to power, which was actually a very fortunate thing for our country. Had President Hu Jintao continued leading China, they might have surpassed the United States, but President Xi Jinping aimed to be number one. His reckless actions worsened China's internal issues, and global scrutiny prevented China from sustaining rapid growth. These days, people keep talking about peak China. To put it simply, peak China means that China has reached its highest point, and now all that's left is for it to decline. Many China experts believe the country may be inflating its economic growth rates, predicting the actual annual growth is only about 3 to 4%. China once declared that it would catch up with the United States, but in 2021, it only reached about 76.4% of the United States level, and now the gap is continuing to widen. In 2022, it fell to 70.6%, then to 64% in 2023. With the low birth rate, China's working age population began declining. As I often say, China can't catch up to the United States because its system isn't efficient. Even if a crisis doesn't happen in China right away, demographic changes, high debt, and an inefficient financial market are holding back China's economic growth. If these issues aren't fixed, China will never be able to catch up with the United States. What do you think about the future predictions made by Chinese scholars in the 1990s? Please let me know in the comments. That's it for this video. Bye.